Now in the digital age, we've still got analog mixing discs. Well, why do we have them? Well, they're very useful things. And I'm going to show you how all the controls work and how to get the maximum possible quality and efficiency from your mixer. Now I've got this desk here. It's a little Behringer desk, and I'm going to show you what all the controls do. Let's take a look. Here then is my mixing desk. I've got a Xenix 1622 Effects, which is a small Behringer desk, and most of the controls that you see here will be synonymous with larger desks and indeed other models. You're listening to this at the moment on an AKG C414 mic. In fact, I've got a matched pair of mics. One goes straight into the computer, which is what you're listening to at the moment. The other goes via the mixing desk here. So I'm going to compare and contrast those two signals as well, so you can hear how well this will stack up with digital equipment. Now, I'm going to say a phrase on one mic, then I'm going to say the same phrase again, but you're going to hear it through the desk, and then from then on, I'll be using the audio from this. So here we go. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. So that's now via this mixing desk, and I'm going to describe some of the features on here, and you can hear the difference with my speech. So I've got my mic connected here via the XLR, the 3-pin connector up here. These line inputs are for CD players or samplers or other stuff that's higher level, including keyboards and DJ record mixers and that sort of thing. We've got a button here which is called low cut. Now on its own it doesn't do a huge amount. If I press that in, 1 2 2 2 1 2 1 2, you can hear, you may be able to hear if you've got a pair of headphones or bigger speakers, that it did cut the very low bass off my voice. The reason for that is that you might have lots of mics on stage and bass becomes a major problem, especially if you've got a sprung floor or a stage that sort of amplifies the bass. So that's the reason we've got this cut here. Most microphones, the condenser microphones like the AKG C414, also have a bass cut switch on, so you may not need that. Now, next control down is called trim. Now, so on some mixing desks, it's called gain or input level or something like that. If I turn this down a bit, you can hear that the level of my voice has gone down. If I turn it up too far, you get distortion, so it's all not very nice. It's all a bit flappy and uncontrolled. So I'm going to turn this back down again. There was a little red light here that flickered. 1, 2. When I actually spoke too loudly, or rather the mic was up too loud. Next down we've got some controls marked EQ, and it could be marked tone control. It's unlikely. Most stuff is called EQ or equalization. Now what we've got is we've got high, mid, frequency and low. What do they do then? Well, the high frequency is all your treble, it's all your sibilance. So if I turn this up, you can hear that my voice is very, very detailed at the top. You can hear the breathiness and all the S sounds. And if I turn it the other way, of course, you can actually attenuate those. So the idea is that the control in the middle, i.e. the 12 o'clock position, represents no change to that EQ. Next down I've got my mid-range, and this takes the form of two controls. On some mixing desks it's actually one control with like a stacked control on top of it, but most of the time you'll find a mid control and the frequency that you're actually boosting or cutting. So if I maybe turn this up slightly, I'm going to boost the mid-range. You can hear that it's changed the characteristic of my voice, and if I vary the frequency that I boost or cut, you can hear that it's doing quite a lot of different things. So you've got a very trebly response here, and then down through the sort of frequencies, and then it's all sort of more boomy over here. And that's that one. Then we've got low, which is the bass. So, of course, if you've got your bass cut switch in, this will sort of go against it a bit. But you can also cut your bass by turning it that way, or you can make it much boomier like that. So you turn it up like that. So the idea is that this really is corrective. the EQ is corrective. You wouldn't use these as effects. So when you're sound checking a vocalist, you may decide to just cut the bass end slightly or turn the top end up slightly so that their sibilance sort of carries over the rest of the band, for example. Next down, we've got something called aux. Now, what this does is this, you won't hear any effect on here, but basically what this does is it sends part of the signal to another place, for example, a monitor speaker. Usually you'd have a little switch marked pre or post. And now this is marked pre at the moment, which means that the level of this auxiliary is actually completely independent of the fader. Just briefly, the fader, if I turn that down, you can hear my voice going down, and if you turn it up, obviously it's going to get louder. Now, this is different to the input level control in that this is the output of the channel. This is where you do your actual mixing and the volume of your channel, feeding the master outputs, which are over here. So we also have a pan control, which enables you to say, okay, I'm going to turn it from left to right. I'm only using the left-hand output of the desk at the moment, so you won't hear the effect of that, other than when I turn it to the right, you won't hear any sound at all. 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, there it is, it's come back. And then if I turn it over to the left, it may indeed get slightly louder because I've prioritized the left-hand output of the channel. We can have a few buttons here. At the moment it's sending my signal to the main outputs, which is what you're listening to this at the moment on. On this desk and some others, you can have also another pair of outputs which you can feed, which is quite useful. Say you want to feed another PA system, or maybe you want to send extra signals elsewhere without affecting the main output, for example. We've got a digital effects here, which I've just turned up here like that. So when I now just turn that up as well, and I'll describe this in a minute. When I turn this up, 1, 2, 2, you can hear it all. Nice or nasty, dependent on your opinion. Now, if I just turn this up here, 1, 2, there's my effects. All of the other channels have an effects control as well, so they will all send their parts of their signal to your effects. And we have a master effects here, which is basically how all of these are mixed together to go into your effects unit, and then that is the output. Now it's a little bit convoluted, so there are 3 control knobs that you need to turn in order to hear your effects. You've got your effect from the channel, the master effects input, and the master effects output. 1, 2. And you can usually set some sort of effect so that you can get different quality waves. The reverb will also have an input level control, which you can see there, 1, 2, so that you can hear that your voice is actually you can see that the voice is going into the effects. It's useful to have metering at every stage of the game. Now, sometimes you can use, in conjunction with your input trim control, you can actually check the level that's coming in to your mixing desk. So, for example, if I press this button in, 1, 2, you can see that the output meter has now doubled as my input, and you can see that I'm using most of the dynamic range of the mixing desk. So if I turn the input level control up to 2, 2, you can see that it's actually in this clipping as well. So I didn't want that level too high. So there are the main output, the main features, both input and output of your mixing desk. You can see that there's lots of other controls here. You can input stereo sources here, like a CD player that is only on one channel, and then that means that the pan control turns into something called balance instead, which is more akin to your hi-fi amp, where you can decide to hear the left or the right channel more, for example. And you have all of these, the same EQ. Sometimes the EQ is actually slightly different for the stereo ones. Instead of an EQ that you can sweep, like I did just now, you have a high mid EQ, which is fixed at 3 kHz, and a low mid, which is fixed at 500. Now, in terms of the frequency figures, 20 Hertz is the very lowest bass that you can hear, and 20 kilohertz or 20,000 Hertz is the highest treble that you can hear. So it represents the extremities of the human range. So 3 kilohertz is sort of high middle, sort of the bottom end of your treble. So for example, if you want to hear a bit more bite from your electric guitar or snare drum, that's kind of the frequency that we're dealing with, 3 kilohertz. 500 hertz is really the sort of body of a snare drum. So if you turn that up, you'll hear more of the depth of that snare, and perhaps a little bit more beefy end of an electric guitar as well. If of course you want to hear lots more bass drum, you would then be turning the low control of 80 Hertz. Similarly, if you wanted to hear the beta of the kick drum, then 3 kilohertz is roughly a sort of a good range to hear the click of the beta. And then your hi-hats or your sibilants or anything else that you need to hear the detail of, maybe a synthesizer or strings, then maybe your high control is where you should be aiming. So there are the controls of a standard mixing desk, and you will find these controls really on most mixers. Now, in order to prevent things like feedback and nasty things from happening, really what you should do is when you're setting up a channel or you're turning up the gain, for example, you should have your fader down, so that you're not sort of turning up something up so high that it results in massive feedback and destruction of your power amp and your speakers or your ears or your headphones. So there are precautionary measures. Really, you should be having your fader low down while you're making any adjustments, and then turn the fader back up in order that you can hear the results of your EQing and your processing. Most mixers will have an input where you can have a CD player or a tape player. Ooh, it's getting on a bit now, but you can connect something up, and you can also record an overall mix by connecting the output of your mixing desk, which allows you to then take a recording of your performance without affecting necessarily your PA system. So there are lots and lots of things that you can do with this mixer, and it's a very good idea to read the manual of a mixer just so that you've got the handle on the main features. So there it is, my little mixing desk with a few of the features explained.